Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Narrative Project's interview with Ronna Russell. We're really excited to have her here today. She's one of the very, very first authors in the the first author in the Narrative Project to complete her book and get it published and out into the world. I'm Cami Ostman. I'm the founder of the Narrative Project, and probably relevant to this conversation, I'm also the editor of a book called Beyond Belief: The Secret Lives of Women in Extreme Religions, which I think is sort of how Ronna and I found each other, perhaps through that publication. And I'm going to introduce Ronna, and then what we'll do is I have a number of questions to ask her. So if you want to hold on to your questions until after Ronna and I have a conversation, and then in the meantime, you can pop your questions in the chat so Ani can keep track and make sure that we don't lose anything. And then we'll open it up to everyone, and you can all ask Ronna anything you want. She may or may not answer you, but I think she will. So let's see. So let me introduce you properly, Ronna.
Thank you.
So, Ronna is delightful. She's a participant in the Narrative Project's 9-month program. And she's written an amazing book called The Uncomfortable Confessions of a Preacher's Kid, which is the story of a childhood controlled by the brutal hand of a narcissistic, closeted homosexual man. And like many of us, probably like all of us, Ronna believed that she could leave her upbringing behind and walk away unscathed. Alas. But she married a closeted homosexual man herself. And as their sex life and bank account dwindled to nothing, fear kept her silent. In the meantime, her father died of AIDS, and the pain of his death fractured her biological family. She clung to her husband and children, creating a cocoon which became a prison. Eventually, however, she was forced to see her husband's homosexuality and refusal to work. She was finally brought to the breaking point. This book tells the story of how Ronna found the courage to be alone, take care of her children, no matter the cost, and to enjoy her own sexual freedom. In the process, she fell in love with life. So welcome, Ronna.
Thank you.
Ronna, do you have your book handy? Will you hold it up?
Yes. This is my book.
There it is. So Yay. Exciting.
That's me.
Congratulations.
I haven't changed.
Changed a little bit, not much.
Not my attitude.
Not your attitude, yeah. So, Ronna, I'm so happy that you joined us. Thank you for making time for this.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
Yeah,
it's nice to see some familiar faces. It's just like old times.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's good. And some new faces too.
Yeah, lots of new faces.
So let's just talk about this book. Yeah. Can you tell us why you wanted to write it?
Yeah. I didn't know I wanted to write it when I first started writing. I was just writing blog posts. I was post-divorce. I was I was a mess, as most people are after they leave a long-term marriage. But I was also, my life was in shambles, but then for the first time on the inside, I was fine. If that makes sense. You know, I was kind of had gotten myself out of what felt like danger. And then these stories just started pouring out of me, and stories about my childhood, which I'm not really sure why exactly they started coming out at that point, but they almost just wrote themselves. And I started publishing my blog posts and immediately found out that there were a whole lot of people that could relate to my upbringing, which I didn't know. Having lived without internet most of my life, you know, I didn't have connections online. I didn't have social media. And I had no idea that my experience was something that other people could relate to. But they did, and I got a lot of encouragement to turn it into a book, only to realize that sounded like a great idea, but I didn't know how to write a book. And I didn't even know how much I didn't know about that process, which of course is where you came in. And I just got lucky. And I was looking for a writing group, actually. I didn't know about your book, Beyond Belief.
Okay.
I was looking for a writing group in Bellingham, and your little ad popped up.
Oh. So that's how
on
we found
Facebook.
each other.
Yeah, that was it. I was blown away when you told me about Beyond Belief. I had no idea you shared my background and had written that.
Yeah.
That was a big surprise to me.
Yeah, I remember when we first talked, and I felt so excited about because your story is so visceral. You know, how you came back to yourself is, and we'll get to that in a second, but is so different than the way so many of the women in Beyond Belief found their way out of the constraints of their various faiths. So. So I see your book about being about the effects of fundamentalism and what a journey it can be to get out of it.
Right.
But I think your story addresses, really something that's even more important, which is about women's power and the power of a woman in her own life to make her own choices. So can you talk about what you learned about womanhood and being a female in a female body while you were growing up, and how that, created the situation that you were in?
It really did create this situation. Those formative years are inescapable. The culture that I grew up in was absolutely strict in that women are lesser than, and children are lesser than that. So it's God, man, woman, child. And this wasn't inferred or danced around, or like, this wasn't just an idea that I picked up. Those were literal teachings, literal words that God speaks to man, and then man's going to tell you what to do. And because you have a vagina, you have to do it. That was just the way, that was the structure. And
Wow.
You didn't question it. Questioning anything regarding the faith, including that hierarchy, was absolutely forbidden. And it only led to trouble.
Yeah.
And asking questions was not welcome.
Yeah. And what was taught to you about sex?
Well, everything and nothing. So there was no tangible teaching, no what you would call sex ed, right? I didn't know the names of my own body parts. I didn't know how they worked or what they were for. I didn't know what sex was. So it was very sheltered in that sense. At the same time, it was the big sin that everyone was dancing around all the time. Teenagers started to date really early, because since all sexual contact was forbidden, you had to get married to have sex. And so people got married when they were older teenagers. By the time they turned 20, most people in that culture were getting married because, they were horny already. And, just.
Yeah, the normal sexual development was happening. You can't stop that from happening.
You can't stop it from happening, but you sure can make it difficult and weird when you withhold information. And so any urges that you have that are completely normal are, you're taught to feel guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And if you actually do slip up, then you've sinned. And, then you're hellbound if you don't get it together and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah. And how did those understandings of gender and sex fail to serve you? I have in my question, fail to serve you in your adulthood, but I was just actually remembering some scenes in your book from before you were kind of technically an adult. So can you talk about how those ideas failed you?
Well, this is such a common theme. I feel like in cultures, and even in past generations, where sex isn't talked about. So it's not just in religious cultures where sex isn't talked about, but in my parents' generation, nobody talked to their kids about sex. So generationally, that was probably pretty normal. But to completely withhold any kind of information and replace information with fear, and also withhold any sense of autonomy, creates a culture where it's just ripe for abuse. So in addition to leaving children, not just female children, but but all children vulnerable to abuse, which is why we see so many stories in the news about abuse within churches, sexual abuse within churches.
Right.
It's just, you couldn't create a better culture for that to thrive in. In addition to the abuse factor, I think the lack of autonomy and lack of language around your own feelings and desires and wants and needs really creates the cone of silence. Wasn't that SNL?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Cone of silence. And you can't, it's inescapable. There's nowhere you can go. You don't have any recourse. You don't have any place to get information.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the fear of hell just colors everything.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that is, I mean, all of the things, no matter where they come from, but then with the authority of God behind them becomes
right.
so big. One of the things that you and I talked a little bit about before getting on the call was kind of these definitions of womanhood. And, what occurs to me is that when you can't talk about something and something is definitively wrong, period, boom. And it leaves sort of this, bifurcated way of looking at life. Like you can really look at it this way or that way. And in terms of who you are as a woman, you're either a good girl or you're a slut, or, can you talk a little bit about, because I know you're really passionate about this. Can you talk about this piece of it?
Sure. Yeah. So, boy, where to start? It's such a big thing, right? So in addition to being, taught to feel the guilt and shame and fear, at the same time, so we're still talking about the religious culture, right? You want to stay there for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
We were also taught that our worth was our body, how we looked, how we comported ourselves, whether or not we were a virgin was the very most important thing, even though we weren't really sure what that meant a lot of the time. So our physical, my body was, it was my worth. It was what I had to offer to anyone, because I was supposed to be looking for a husband from a fairly young age, right? And that was the thing that you had to give. It was really good if you were pretty without makeup and you could sing and play the piano, but virginity was paramount. And so the message there to an adolescent is that my vagina is the sum total of my worth in this world. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it better be untouched, right, and unsullied. And so then all of the things that go along with that, if you're flirty, if you go out with more than one boy, if people decide they don't like you and they're going to start gossiping about you, it's the grapevine is vicious and rampant in that culture because it's so small. The society's so small, and everyone's watching everybody else to see if they slip up. And if they do, especially a preacher's kid, then your reputation is ruined and you may as well jump off a bridge.
Yeah. So the stakes are really, really high.
Really high.
Yeah.
The surveillance is very real.
Yeah.
Everyone's watching.
And you mentioned being a preacher's kid, so let's talk a little bit about your family story. And so your dad was one of the leaders in this fairly small sect, right?
Right.
And your family moved around a bit when he had a different assignment. And so can you sort of talk a little bit about give us a thumbnail of the family history and sort of what led you into, adulthood, kind of not being in touch with and not being able to kind of discern what was going on in your marriage.
Okay. Read the last part by me again.
Yeah.
Am I connecting?
Yeah. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I really want to know is give us a little thumbnail of the history of your family
Okay.
and how growing up in that family allowed you not to see the signs of things going on in the marriage
Okay.
later on.
All right. All right. That makes sense to me. So the thumbnail of my family was my dad was this really, he was a big fish in a small pond. He was an important guy, very articulate, well spoken, well thought of. Um, and people looked up to him and watched our family, right? So the gender roles were very clear. He was very important. My mom and my sisters and myself were his support staff. Our role was to make him look good and be an example. Um, what he said went. That was the final word, no matter what. And so even though I could see that was pretty screwed up even as a kid, and I would look to my mom to like, are you ever going to stand up to him? She was never going to, and I hated that. At the same time, I didn't know anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got married as a young adult and had a family, I didn't know how else to be. One thing, I didn't know how to take care of myself in the world very well. Didn't, go to college, get an education, do other things. Those were mysteries to me. So I jumped into a marriage with a guy that, I can't say that he forced any kind of a gender role on me. He didn't. I just didn't know what else to do with myself. So I adopted it, and I expected him to adopt a traditional gender role as well. And that wasn't really his thing. So we were always at odds because he wasn't doing the things I expected him to do. And the expectations were unreasonable because they didn't reflect his reality or what he wanted out of life. But I was just sort of, I didn't know how else to be a person.
Right.
And so it did prevent me from, as the years go by and you create a life and you have a family, then it isn't so easy to just say, hey, this isn't working for me, I want out.
Right. There's a lot of moving pieces there and a lot of people affected.
Right. And then there was always, because of the nature of his own story, he was homosexual and hadn't come to terms with that yet. And I didn't realize that about him. So I was always just kind of knowing that something was deeply missing from our relationship. It was sex, because one of the other things you're never taught is that sex is a really important part of a relationship, and
right.
if you're not communicating there, that's a problem. It's one of the big marital problems, right up there with money, and we had both of those issues.
Yeah.
So my ignorance on that front just prevented me from having the courage to say, we have to fix what's wrong or we can't continue. So I held on, gritting my teeth until I couldn't anymore. And then it was ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had an example of that in your family of origin of a woman holding on and gritting her teeth.
Right.
Yeah.
And even with that example, I still couldn't see it happening to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? It is amazing how we, we can look in it. It's, to me, it's a narrative issue. Everything is, to me, we are telling ourselves one story, and you can't tell yourself more than one story at a time. You can't look at, more than one landscape. You can't see what's behind you or over here in your peripheral vision unless you pause and you look over there. So we can really not see so much. It's very powerful.
Yeah. And when you're determined to make something work, that really is another set of blinders.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was so afraid of, I was afraid of being alone. I was afraid I would lose my kids. I was talking to somebody about this just a day or two ago. One of the things that really kept me there was that my ex-husband was the fun parent. and I wasn't. I was the one that was always cleaning and, gritting her teeth and trying to make sure everything got done, and all the kids were accounted for and the dogs were fed and yada, yada, right?
Yeah,
And
you
he was
had to.
watching science fiction movies and giving the kids, cookies for breakfast. And so I always felt like, in addition to not having any money and no way to really financially take care of everyone, if we were to split up, the kids would probably want to stay with him, and I couldn't bear that.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't
Yeah,
couldn't bear it. Why would they want to go with the disciplinarian?
sure. Yeah, and
Okay,
that keeps you in place. The
right,
all of the potential losses
hmm,
often hold us in place,
right.
which is one of the
It's
things that I
terrifying.
really love about your book is the way that your story is so universal. I mean, not everyone grows up in a small sect, with a father who's a closeted homosexual and marries a man who's a closeted homosexual, but everyone has the experience of being stuck in a place in life and not moving from that place because of all the losses they know will come down the pike when they do.
Hmm. The fear, paralyzing, and everything I was afraid of happened.
Well, yeah, right. I
It
mean,
didn't kill me.
I think that's really important to speak to, actually. So
Yeah.
talk about that, because I do really believe that, we say this to each other, it's going to be okay. You just have to get through this thing here. And, it's not all going to unfold the way that you think it is. But in fact, sometimes when we make a stand for ourselves in this life, we do experience everyone else turning their backs and all of our fears coming true. And so talk about that and why it might be worth it anyway, from your perspective.
Well, I hung on until everything blew up, and there was no choice left but to leave. And my God, I was so broke.
Yeah.
I was like really, really incredibly broke. The kids were not okay. I was not okay. My ex-husband was not okay. He had a whole thing to figure out on his own, and so he was not there for me or the kids, not financially, not emotionally, not in any sense. And so I really did feel like it was all up to me. I had to hold everybody together and pay for everything. And that was how I knew it would be. And I was right. And it was really hard. And it wasn't over quickly. I did
Right.
that for years.
Yeah.
And but when you're faced with the decision, like I can work however many jobs or however many hours a week and have some food in the house or not, you're going to do it. If you're faced with, like, okay, I don't feel like I can deal with the situation with my teenager, you're going to do it anyway because you have to. So I think all of those years of just being afraid of what was coming, um, probably would have been less difficult if I had taken the steps sooner and with more thought and care and not waited until I was at the end of my rope, because then I was so depleted, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but I still had to pull it all together and hold everybody together. And those were the things that I was so afraid of. I was afraid of being that poor
Mm-hmm.
and having to work a job where I wasn't paid well. And that sounds kind of trivial to like, oh, I was afraid of being poor. But no, I mean, I was really broke, and I had, you know, 3 of my 4 kids were still at home and needed to go to school and college, and there was rent and car payments, and it's terrifying to
Yeah.
live that close to the edge all the time.
Yeah, it does not
Terrifying.
sound trivial to me at all. I really, know after working with people for years, but particularly working with women in therapy, that many women have a terror of being completely poor and living under a bridge. And
Yeah.
it's, something that, so what I think is really interesting is that the fear fueled your forward movement, because the alternative was to crumble and and let the kids who knows what happens to everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you did it sort of
Exactly.
out of necessity and fueled by that fear and anxiety. But then what began to heal you?
I want to add
Yeah.
one thing there. So when that happened in my family of origin and everybody fell apart, my dad was gone and my mom was left holding the bag, they all just fell apart completely. And I felt like, even though it was so strange to be in such a similar situation in my own marriage, I felt like I was going to take care of my kids come hell or high water because no one took care of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had something to prove that I'm not going to disappear on them. I'm not going to throw in the towel and say, oh, it's too hard, I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to show not only myself, but I needed to show them that I had their back and I was there for them and I was going to get them through it. It was years before I could afford to go to therapy because I had a high deductible and I couldn't even afford the $30 copay.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in the first session, my therapist saying, well, why'd you wait so long to come in? And I just kind of laughed and like, because I needed the $30 for food.
Yeah.
It's that desperate. So, it was great to finally be able to go, but I had, and one of my daughters has a chronic illness as well. So just to make things a little bit more complicated,
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely determined that they know that I had their back, and I did that. I did that for them.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it wasn't just the fear of being
mm-hmm.
poor, but there was also like you had a wrong you needed to right for
mm-hmm.
yourself and something you wanted to make sure never happened for your children.
Right. Yeah, I just felt like I will not let them down. I know that the divorce was hard on them, and I felt really guilty because I felt like it was all my fault, even though of course it wasn't.
Yeah.
But I did carry that, and so I needed to make that up to them as well.
Yeah. And then so talk about your healing and talk specifically about how sex was part of your healing and your sort of finding things inside of yourself that you, I'm sure, are drawing on still.
Sure. So my marriage had been mostly sexless because my ex-husband was not, he was gay. He wasn't bi, so we had no sexual connection. And going into it as a very young adult, I didn't realize that was never going to get better. I didn't really know what a complete relationship looked like or felt like. I knew we didn't have it, but I didn't know what to go for. I didn't know what to ask for. I certainly didn't know how to ask to have my own needs met. I didn't know how to tell him what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I gave up pretty quickly because he was so disinterested. So after 20 years of that, 22 years of that, I was
a long time.
starving for connection. And one of my, the things I thought, well, since the marriage is mostly good, it's just, the sex that's missing. I mean, things are actually a whole lot worse than I realized at that point. I decided that I would open our marriage up, and I talked my ex-husband into it. I don't think he really cared because it gave him an out. And I guess the term is ethical non-monogamy, right? Where you open your marriage up, and I wasn't sneaking around, lying and cheating. I was cheating, but it was with permission,
mm-hmm.
which I guess is what that means,
mm-hmm.
cheating with permission.
Yeah.
And I did meet someone who I had amazing chemistry with. It was not an emotional affair in any way. It was purely physical. And I talk about that a lot in the book. And that's the one thing that it does put some people off because it's such an important piece to me that I couldn't leave it out, and I didn't want to gloss over it either.
Right.
Like this was the thing that put me back in my body. It reconnected my mind and body and made me feel like myself.
Yeah.
Like this is who I am. It was this relationship, this sexual relationship with someone I didn't actually know very well. We met up for sex probably just a handful of times over the course of a few months. But it was like electric shock treatment, it just put me back together. Yeah. And then I felt powerful and like I knew who I was again. And boy, it's so hard to describe that reconnection of mind and body when they've been living so separately for so long, because I over intellectualized everything that was happening in my marriage and what I was missing physically.
Well, I think your book, the first scene in your book, does a fantastic job of describing that whole, I mean, everybody, just so you know, like Rana doesn't leave you wondering about this. The first scene of the book is a powerful and very specific description of one of her encounters with this fellow, but you really do describe how you were put back into your body.
Yeah.
It's a powerful scene.
Thank you. It was a powerful experience. And part of that power was the realization for the first time probably in my entire life that I could have sex just for fun without emotional attachment. I wasn't going into it with any kind of emotional neediness. Yeah. I wasn't looking for anything else. Yeah. It was just for that purpose alone. And when I was done, and we went our merry ways and never saw him again.
And now you're married to a wonderful partner, and you are going to school. You're going to college now, and
I am.
Right. And you have a book out. And let's talk a little bit about the publishing journey. Because we have a bunch of writers here, and I know they want to know, like, how'd you get this thing to happen?
Oh wow! So I wrote my book proposal based on your template, which was great, and tried to find agents, an agent or a publisher who was looking for memoir, and that in itself was pretty tough to find someone who was actively seeking memoir. Most of the agents and publishers that I found were looking for fiction. So I put my book proposal on this site called authors.me, and you can load up your entire book proposal, because I was getting nowhere going the traditional route with, querying everywhere and getting really nothing in return. And I was starting to get pretty frustrated with the process until I found this site. It's a site that publishing houses and agents can, if they're members, they can look at anybody's proposal that's on this site. So you load up all the various pieces, and I had them all ready, the bio and all of it was ready to go.
Good job, Rana. Good job.
Yeah. Thank you. I loaded up all the pieces and heard from this publishing company right away. They wanted to, you actually load up your entire manuscript. And so they had people who were shopping for them. And they signed me right away. It's an independent publisher, which means it didn't cost me anything up front, which was important to me. But they also don't do any marketing or anything. They did the book design, they did the cover, the interior design, and set me up on Amazon with an ISBN number. But that's really about all that they did. They didn't even do my editing or final proofread or anything. That was all up to me.
Right. So you invested in, you followed the template for the book proposal. And then I know that when we were working together, that we had looked at a couple of different structures, and then you worked with a developmental editor and ended up restructuring the book one more time. It's pretty straightforward, chronological order, except for that first scene. And mostly, yeah. Yeah. And so you had a really solid, but you had to hire out the developmental editor, the proofreader, or you proofread yourself.
Yeah, I ran out of money. I couldn't afford a proofreader. I had to do
Okay.
it myself with Grammarly. And then I did actually have a friend that read it and pointed out a few edits to me that was really helpful. If I could rewind, I would do the developmental edits before I even started looking for a publisher. That made such a huge difference to work with someone who had never read my writing before and didn't know the story, and was able to point out some little patterns that I had developed that that she just helped me fix.
Fantastic.
That was a great step, and it was so important to work with somebody completely new.
Yes.
That was looking at my work with fresh eyes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel that way sometimes in therapy when I'm working with a client for 10 years, and then it suddenly dawns on me like, maybe I'm part of the system too, right?
Yeah.
So I do. Is what you're saying is very important. That it's really important to get not just beta readers, but to get a developmental editor at a certain point who comes to your material fresh and is looking at the overall arc. We start to see the trees instead of the forest.
Right.
And it is important to get fresh eyes to look at the big picture. So so you got it done, and you got a publisher who didn't charge you to publish, and you had to do so kind of a hybrid. You had to do some of the pieces, and now you're doing the marketing, and you're getting responses from readers. So what has surprised you about the responses that you're getting?
I don't know that I have any real surprises. I haven't gotten as much backlash from the religious community as I thought I might, which is great. I have had a whole lot of people leave wonderful reviews, think they related to the story, and are glad that I'm speaking out, and a whole lot more private messages for people who don't want to put their name on a review, saying the same thing. And it makes me, glad that I did it, and glad that they read it, and kind of sad at the same time that this is not a unique story, and so many people have been put through this system and chewed up by it.
Yeah.
But it feels good to know that reading my story helps.
Yeah. You got it out of your body, and you're helping other people along the way. It's amazing.
That I said something the other day on some podcast or something, and another interview that I did, and I said, nobody can choose celibacy for you. And somebody picked up on that and messaged me and said, "Oh, I'm stuck in a sexless marriage." And I've had a few people do that, and they're not going to leave a review on Amazon, but they're they want to go out for coffee, or they want to talk, and it's such a huge, I think, fairly widespread problem in our society, and nobody really talks about it because it's embarrassing, and you don't want to admit that your partner doesn't want you. So I think it's one of those situations of, it's closely related to having a gay spouse, and oftentimes the two go hand in hand.
Right. If you're not gay, also, if you have a gay spouse and you're gay, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I do actually have a friend whose husband, she came out to her husband. They had 3 little kids. This is, many years ago. And she said, I have to tell you something. I'm gay. And he goes, "Oh, thank goodness, so am I." And they.
Oh yes, opposite sex gay. Yes, also is a whole nother. Right. Lots of complexity here.
Yeah. But so from my experience, it's you being the straight spouse.
Yeah.
And having that whole mysterious thing happen. For so many years, I didn't want to admit I couldn't tell anybody how bad it was in the bedroom, right? And I just don't. I think that's probably pretty common, whether you're the straight spouse or just the intimacy is gone.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to talk about.
It is. It's a hard thing. It's a really hard thing to talk about, even in your therapist office. Hey, Rana, I'd love to open up the space for other people to jump in and ask you questions.
That
Are
would
you
be
game for
great.
that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I've changed my screen so I can see all of you. So you just have to sort of wave your hand, or let me just check in with Ani first. Ani, are there some questions in the chat that nothing,
No,
nothing yet?
I only have my own question.
Okay. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Rana, I'm curious about your journey with building platform. I feel like you've done a really great job at building platform and momentum, and I'm just curious what you've done and what worked and what didn't work.
Okay, thank you. I feel like it's been a real struggle, to be honest with you. I'm not crazy about social media, but you really do have to get yourself out there. Um,
Hey, Rana, we're losing
put
your.
out podcasts. I've done quite a few podcasts at this point, and they've all been people recovering from religion, ex-fundamentalism, and that kind of thing.
It's okay. I turned your video off for a second because you were getting warbly, so I thought maybe we could maximize your bandwidth.
Okay.
It was so warbly that I couldn't understand like the last 3 sentences at least. When Rana, when you started answering Annie's question, you came on really warbly and I couldn't understand any of it. I don't know if anybody else had that same experience. If people had that same experience, if you could repeat it for us.
That would be great.
Sure, yeah. We were just talking about social media platforms, and have a Facebook author page and connected it to my Instagram and to Twitter. And I've probably had the most luck with my regular Facebook page. I have more connections there. I think people are more hesitant to sign up to an author page because they know right off the bat that you just want them to buy your book, which is true. So that, I don't have anywhere near as many people following my author page as just my regular Facebook page where I post pictures of my dog, So I try to keep a mix of blog posts and stuff that's related to topics I'm interested in. And my dog, who's really, really, really cute. So if you haven't seen pictures of my dog, you should definitely.
Yeah, go with her and friend Rana.
Everybody looks so serious.
It's a cute. She has a cute dog.
The whole social media thing is a struggle for me. It's a hard thing. I've had the most success, I think, with podcasts. With podcast interviews. I sought a few of those out, and then a few people approached me, and they've all been about religion, leaving religion. So that seems to be my niche.
Yeah.
Do you go on other people's podcasts, or do you have your own?
No, I don't have a podcast. I do interviews on other people's podcasts.
That's great.
Yeah. And you do a good job too. I've heard a couple of them.
Oh, thank you. It's pretty fun. People come into it with, thoughtful questions, and it's a good experience.
Yeah,
great.
Good.
And there's a question here in the chat box from Jill. Can you talk about your writing process itself, the actual writing process? Did it come in pieces, or was it pretty sustained, or how did you go about actually doing the work of the writing?
Bits and pieces. Yeah. That's a great question. I could not have done this without Tammy and the writing group. I had
there you go. Let's see if I'm not sure if you'll be warbly or not. Again, if you are, we'll turn off your video.
Okay.
No.
I had just a handful of.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it working now?
Now we have to turn your video off to get your bandwidth. Sorry. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to look exactly the same. So that's okay. Um, what was the question? Where were we?
It was about your
I
writing
got
process.
distracted.
About your writing process.
Oh, the writing process, right. So I had my hands full of blog posts that I had published very sporadically, and that is what I came to Cami and the Narrative Project with just these blog posts and some ideas. So once I started with the writing group, that really kept me on track because I wanted to get feedback on all of my chapters, and I felt like the arc came together pretty quickly. But I had so much to learn in terms of scenic depiction and writing dialogue and all of the basic skills that I just didn't have. So that kept me super busy, and I would say, how long did I work? I did 2 sessions with you, right, Tammy?
Yeah, you did. You did
Were
the
they
9
9
months to
month
get your book
sessions
done,
or
and then the
6?
next chapter revisions.
I think one was 9 and one was 6.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I was done with the second session, the book was ready for a developmental edit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that was about a year and a half, and I wrote consistently.
Yeah.
I didn't take any time off in that year and a half.
Yeah.
But yeah, I stuck to it, and I was working full time at the time, and so evenings and weekends, that's just what I did.
Yeah.
I felt like the structure of the Narrative Project really kept me on track because there was always, every week, there was a way to be held accountable, and I respond well to that kind of pressure, so that worked for me.
Gentle,
But
kind
I would
pressure.
say, like, start to finish, when I first started writing blog posts, that was 2015. So
Yeah. It came together pretty
Yes.
fast. Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more
That's
questions.
fine.
Does anybody else have a question for Rana? We may have answered everybody's questions. Oh, here's Nikki. Nikki, what's your question?
Is your book at Village Books?
Oh.
I don't know.
Oh.
I know they can order it.
Okay. Is it better to order
yeah,
from them or from Amazon? Well, I mean,
that's up to you. I know Tammy would say order from your independent bookstore, but it is on Amazon.
Okay.
If they can't get it for you. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Village Book probably doesn't stock it. Oh, thanks. Independent bookstores can't always order, like, they're not going to order a big stack of my books because they're not returnable.
Yeah.
But if you request it, they can order it.
Yeah.
I'm a little fuzzy on how all that works.
Yeah. So there's different kinds of distribution, and with the big distributors for the big 5, if the bookstore orders books and then they don't sell, they can send those back. And so, but with the smaller distributors, such as Rana's publisher used, those books can't be sent back. So they only want to order what they know they can sell. So you can totally order it from Village Books. But we wouldn't order 20 of them unless we had 20 people to buy them, because Village Books couldn't return. Yeah.
There's another question here on the
in the chat.
The chat that says, Rana, do you feel like writing about the same stuff on your blog diluted the power of your book or added to it?
Good question.
That is a good question.
I'm hoping we can hear the answer.
I think it added to it. The blog post. What's that?
I said, I hope we can hear
Can
the
you
answer, because
hear
you're warbly.
Are you able to hear me?
Mostly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll try to speak up. I'm not sure what to do about it. I think the blogging actually was very helpful because it instigated, what's that?
No, I didn't say anything. I'm just going to repeat back what you said, that
brought
the
interest to the subject, and so people started following the blog, and those are the people who.
well, we may have lost her. For those of you who didn't catch what she was saying that that she drew interest because of the blog. And I also know that Rana was a part of other social media groups that were on the same topic. And so those, so she was engaged with those to a certain degree already, and had even done, I think, some guest blogging in a couple of places. So she was developing a conversation already about the topic. Rana, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
We can't really hear you very well. So unfortunately, I'm going to put your video back on so that we can wave at you. But unfortunately, I think if we can't get your audio to be a little better, I'm going to ask to start your video here. Let's see. There you are.
Hi.
Hi. So we have bad reception with you, but I wanted to make sure that we could thank you for joining us, and that you could see everybody giving appreciation to you. We really so appreciate this chance to connect with you. Yeah, and thank you for spending some time. And everybody, please do go buy Rana's book.
Sure.
And I don't know how we can get her to sign it, but I bet we can somehow. And maybe we can even get her to come back out this direction at some point and do a reading for us.
Mhm.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rana.
Absolutely. It would be great.
Thank you. All right, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Lots of
you.
love. Mwah. Take care.